"Mom, this is where you get out." My own daughter said those words to me like I was a stranger she was dropping off at a bus stop. I never thought I'd live to feel this kind of loneliness. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if you, for just 1 second, feel like this sounds familiar, please just leave a like and subscribe. It'll help me keep sharing these truths that need to be heard. My name is Margaret, and I'm 73 years old. 6 days after burying my husband Leo, my daughter Jennifer drove me away from the only home I'd known for 42 years. The morning fog in Portland, Oregon hung thick and suffocating around our old Victorian house on Cedar Street, the same fog that seemed to wrap around my heart as I stood there in my worn slippers, clutching my purse like a lifeline. I had spent that morning like every other for the past month since Leo's funeral, making Jennifer's favorite coffee, the French roast she'd loved since college, grinding the beans by hand the way she always requested when she visited. The kitchen still smelled like cinnamon rolls, the ones I'd baked at 5 a.m. because I couldn't sleep, couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Jennifer sat at our dining table, the maple one Leo had built with his own hands in 1987, wearing a crisp black business suit I'd never seen before. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her green eyes, once so much like mine, had turned cold as winter stones. She didn't touch the coffee. She didn't even look at me. "We need to talk, Mom," she said, her voice carrying the same tone she used with difficult clients at her real estate firm. Professional, detached, final. I wiped my hands on the apron Leo had given me for our last Christmas together, red with tiny white flowers, now faded from countless washings. "Of course, honey. Is everything all right? You've seemed so distant since—" "The house papers are being transferred today," she interrupted, pulling a manila folder from her briefcase with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "For tax reasons. Estate planning. You understand." I didn't understand. Not then. I trusted her completely, the way only a mother can trust the child she raised, fed, protected, and sacrificed for through 37 years of unconditional love. Jennifer had been my miracle baby, born after 3 miscarriages that had left me hollow and Leo quietly heartbroken. When she finally arrived, pink and perfect and screaming with life, we promised each other we'd give her everything we never had. And we did. Every penny Leo earned as a carpenter went toward Jennifer's future. Every weekend I spent managing our small bed and breakfast instead of resting went toward her college fund. When she wanted to study in Europe during her junior year, we remortgaged the house. When she needed money for her real estate license, we emptied our vacation savings. When she and her husband Marcus bought their first home, we co-signed the loan and helped with the down payment. "Tax reasons," I repeated slowly, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "But honey, this is our home. Your father built this porch with his own hands. He planted those oak trees when you were born." Jennifer's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mom, you're not thinking clearly. You haven't been since Dad died. Marcus and I have been discussing this for weeks. It's the responsible thing to do." Weeks. They'd been planning this for weeks while I grieved, while I cooked their meals and washed their clothes and pretended not to notice the whispered conversations that stopped whenever I entered a room. While I'd been grateful for their company in my darkest hours, they'd been calculating how to take everything Leo and I had built together. "But where will I began, my voice barely a whisper. "There's a nice senior community across town," Jennifer said, sliding a brochure across the table with the same casual indifference she might show when discussing the weather. "Sunset Manor. They have activities, meal plans, people your own age. You'll be much happier there." The brochure showed smiling elderly people playing bingo, sitting in wheelchairs by windows, being spoon-fed by nurses in white uniforms. The tagline read, "Where golden years shine brightest." I wanted to laugh at the cruelty of it, but no sound came out. "Jennifer," I said, my hands beginning to tremble as the reality of what was happening slowly sank in. "This is my home. I can't just leave. Your father's workshop is still in the basement. His tools, his projects, the garden we planted together, the inn we've run for 20 years. The inn isn't profitable anymore, Mom. You know that. The mortgage is underwater, and frankly, You're too old to manage guests properly. Mrs. Henderson complained about the thread count in her sheets last month. The Johnsons said the bathroom faucet dripped all night. You're letting standards slip. Each criticism hit like a physical blow. I had poured my soul into that inn, greeting every guest like family, staying up until midnight to ensure their comfort, baking fresh scones every morning even when my arthritis made kneading dough an agony. The Henderson complaint had been about Egyptian cotton versus regular cotton, a difference she couldn't have detected if I hadn't mentioned it. The Johnsons' faucet had been fixed within an hour of their mention. I can do better, I heard myself saying, hating the pleading tone in my voice. I can hire help. I can update things. Please, Jennifer, just give me some time. Marcus appeared in the doorway then, as if summoned by some silent signal. Jennifer's husband of 12 years stood 6 feet tall with prematurely gray hair, and the kind of confident smile that had always made me slightly uncomfortable. He'd worked in finance before switching to commercial real estate, and he spoke about money the way other people discuss the weather, constantly and with absolute certainty. Margaret, he said, using my first name with the familiarity of someone who'd never asked permission to do so. I know this is difficult, but Jennifer and I have run the numbers. The property taxes alone are eating into your fixed income. Social Security and Leo's pension aren't enough to maintain a property this size. I wanted to tell him that I'd been managing our finances just fine for 42 years, that Leo and I had built our nest egg through careful planning and hard work, that I knew exactly how much money we had and where every penny went. But something in his tone made me feel small, confused, like a child being lectured about matters too complex for her understanding. The transition will be seamless, Jennifer continued, her voice softening slightly, perhaps recognizing my distress. We'll handle everything. The moving company, the storage unit for your personal items, the arrangements at Sunset Manor. You won't have to worry about anything. Won't have to worry. As if worry was my biggest concern, rather than the complete destruction of everything that gave my life meaning and purpose. As if 42 years of memories could be packed into a storage unit like seasonal decorations, pulled out and dusted off when sentiment required. But the guests, I whispered. We have bookings through Christmas. The Pattersons come every year for their anniversary. Mrs. Chen has been staying here every spring for 8 years. They're like family. We'll honor existing reservations, Marcus said with the dismissive wave of someone shooing away an insect. After that, we'll reassess the business model. Maybe convert to long-term rentals. The neighborhood is gentrifying rapidly. Gentrifying. Another word that felt like a slap. Our neighborhood had been home to working families for generations. Leo and I had watched children grow up, get married, start families of their own. We'd attended block parties and neighborhood cleanups, had shoveled Mrs. Peterson's driveway every winter for 15 years after her husband passed. We weren't a business model or an investment opportunity. We were a community. The papers Jennifer placed in front of me might as well have been written in a foreign language. Legal terms swam before my eyes. Quitclaim deed, estate transfer, tax optimization. My hands shook as I held the pen she offered, its weight seeming enormous. Just here, Mom, Jennifer said, pointing to a line marked with a yellow sticky note. And here. And initial there. I signed because I trusted her, because she was my daughter, and daughters don't betray their mothers. Because the alternative, believing that the child I'd raised was capable of such calculated cruelty, was too devastating to accept. The ink was barely dry when Jennifer's expression shifted from false comfort to business-like efficiency. Marcus is outside with the car, she said, gathering the papers with quick, practiced movements. We should get going. Check-in at Sunset Manor is at 2 o'clock. Now. The word came out as a squeak. Today, but I haven't packed anything. I need to call the guests, arrange for coverage, close the bank accounts. We've handled all that, Marcus said from the doorway. Your belongings will be delivered tomorrow. The important things, photos, jewelry, personal items, are already in the car. Already in the car. They'd packed my life while I was signing it away, reducing 73 years of existence to whatever fit in their trunk. I wondered if they'd remembered Leo's wedding ring, the one I kept in my jewelry box because it was too painful to wear but too precious to put away. I wondered if they'd packed the photo album from our honeymoon, or the ceramic bird Leo had bought me at a craft fair during our first year of marriage. The ride to Sunset Manor passed in a blur of familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign, landmarks that had anchored my world for decades now serving as farewell markers. The house where Leo and I had first kissed goodnight after our third date. The park where we'd taught Jennifer to ride a bicycle, running behind her with our hands on the seat until she found her balance and pedaled away, laughing with pure joy. The grocery store where I'd shopped every Friday for 20 years. Where the cashiers knew my name and asked about my family. All of it slipping away through the car window like scenes from someone else's life. Jennifer and Marcus spoke quietly in the front seat, their words indistinct, but their tone unmistakably that of people discussing a successfully completed transaction. Occasionally, Jennifer would glance at me in the rearview mirror with what might have been guilt or concern, but she always looked away quickly, as if my reflection was too difficult to bear. "Here we are," Marcus announced with false cheerfulness as we pulled into a circular driveway lined with manicured shrubs. Sunset Manor looked exactly like the brochure. Clean, institutional, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. The building was modern brick and glass, surrounded by perfectly maintained lawns that looked more like a golf course than a place where people actually lived. As I stepped out of the car, my legs unsteady after the silent ride, I caught sight of my reflection in the building's glass doors. An old woman in a faded floral dress and cardigan, clutching a purse like it contained everything she owned, which, I realized with a shock that made my knees buckle, it very nearly did. The room at Sunset Manor smelled like disinfectant and artificial lavender, a combination that made my stomach turn. Room 247. That's what I was now. Not Margaret, not Mrs. Sullivan, not the woman who had run a successful bed and breakfast for 20 years. Just a number on a door. As I sat on the narrow single bed with its industrial-grade mattress, staring at the small window that overlooked the parking lot, memories began flooding back with cruel clarity. Every sacrifice Leo and I had made for Jennifer suddenly felt different, tainted by the knowledge of how little they had meant to her. I remembered the first time she'd asked for money. She was 22, fresh out of college, and wanted to start her real estate career in downtown Portland instead of the smaller suburbs where rent was affordable. "Mom, this is my chance," she'd said, her eyes bright with ambition. "The commission potential downtown is 3 times what I'd make anywhere else. I just need help with the security deposit and first few months' rent until I get established." Leo and I had been planning a trip to Ireland that summer, our first real vacation in 15 years. We'd saved for 2 years, researching small villages and cozy bed and breakfasts, imagining ourselves walking the coastal cliffs he'd seen in travel documentaries. But Jennifer needed us. And what kind of parents would we be if we didn't help our daughter chase her dreams? We gave her $8,000. The Ireland trip became a long weekend in Seattle. "It's an investment in her future," Leo had said, though I caught him sometimes staring at the travel brochures I'd hidden in my dresser drawer. "Our girl's going to be successful. This will pay off." It did pay off. For Jennifer. Within 6 months, she'd sold 3 houses and earned enough commission to afford her downtown apartment without our help. But she never offered to pay us back. When I finally worked up the courage to mention it, she'd looked genuinely confused. "Mom, I thought that was a gift. Parents help their children, right? Besides, I'm building my career. Every dollar I make goes back into growing the business." She'd said it so matter-of-factly, as if our sacrifice was simply the natural order of things. As if Leo working double shifts for 3 months to rebuild our savings was just what fathers did. As if my taking on extra cleaning shifts at the inn to make up the difference was merely what mothers owed their children. The pattern continued for years. When Jennifer decided she needed a newer car for client meetings, we co-signed the loan and made the first 6 payments until she got caught up. When she and Marcus wanted to take a vacation to Europe for their honeymoon, she casually mentioned how expensive it was, sighing about having to settle for something local instead. Leo and I had given them $3,000 as a wedding gift, watching them beam with joy as they described the romantic Paris hotel where they'd be staying. We'd celebrated their happiness while eating tuna sandwiches for dinner to stretch our grocery budget. Every Christmas became a performance of gratitude that felt increasingly hollow. Jennifer would hug us and thank us for being the most generous parents in the world while unwrapping gifts that had cost us months of careful saving. Meanwhile, her gifts to us grew smaller and more thoughtless each year. Generic candles, discount store picture frames, gift cards to restaurants we never went to because they were too expensive. Last Christmas, she'd given me a calendar from the dollar store. It was still in the plastic wrapper. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was the way she'd slowly trained us to expect less and less of her time and attention, while demanding more and more of our resources and emotional energy. Phone calls became sporadic, then rare. "I'm so busy with work, Mom. You understand." Sunday dinners became monthly, then holidays only. Then even holidays became negotiable if Marcus's family had competing plans. When Leo was diagnosed with his heart condition 2 years ago, Jennifer's visits to the hospital were brief and scheduled around her showing appointments. "Dad's going to be fine," she'd say, checking her phone while Leo slept, machines beeping around his bed. "The doctors know what they're doing. He's tough." I'd spent 12 hours a day at that hospital, holding Leo's hand, reading to him from the woodworking magazines he loved, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside his bed, because I couldn't bear the thought of him waking up alone. Jennifer came 3 times in 2 weeks. Marcus never came at all. When Leo came home, weak and fragile, and needing constant care, I'd transformed our bedroom into a recovery room. I'd learned to check his blood pressure, monitor his medications, help him with physical therapy exercises. I'd given up managing the inn's daily operations to become his full-time caregiver, hiring temporary help we couldn't afford to keep our business running. Jennifer's response to her father's condition was to send a fruit basket and a card that read, "Thinking of you both during this difficult time," as if we were distant acquaintances rather than the people who had raised her, loved her, sacrificed everything for her success and happiness. The inn suffered during Leo's illness. I couldn't give guests the attention they deserved while caring for a sick husband. Reservations dropped. Reviews mentioned the lack of personal touches that had once made our place special. Our savings dwindled as Leo's medical bills mounted and the business income decreased. Jennifer never offered to help. Not financially, not practically, not emotionally. When I finally broke down and called her, sobbing into the phone about how exhausted and scared I was, she'd listened for exactly 3 minutes before saying, "Mom, I wish I could help, but Marcus and I are trying to buy a bigger house. We're stretched pretty thin right now." They bought a 4-bedroom colonial in the affluent West Hills neighborhood 2 months later. Jennifer posted photos on social media of their housewarming party. Elegant cocktails, catered appetizers, friends laughing on their expansive deck. The caption read, "Blessed to have achieved our dream home through hard work and determination." Hard work and determination. No mention of the $23,000 Leo and I had contributed to their various emergencies and opportunities over the years. No acknowledgement of the down payment assistance that had helped them qualify for their first mortgage, which they'd then leveraged to buy this mansion. I'd scrolled through those photos sitting beside Leo's hospital bed during one of his setbacks, my heart breaking not just from worry about my husband, but from the realization that we had become invisible to the daughter we'd made the center of our universe. The night Leo died, I'd called Jennifer at 11:30 p.m., my voice breaking as I tried to form the words. "Honey, your father. He's gone. Please come. I need you." She'd arrived 2 hours later, rushing in with red eyes and trembling hands, throwing herself into my arms with what felt like genuine grief. For a moment, I thought the crisis had reminded her who we really were to each other. I thought losing Leo might bring us closer, might help her understand how precious and fragile family connections really were. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she'd whispered against my shoulder. "I should have been here more. I should have helped more. I'm going to take care of you now. I promise." Those words had been my lifeline during the dark days that followed. When the funeral arrangements felt overwhelming, when the paperwork seemed endless, when the silence in our house became unbearable, I'd clung to Jennifer's promise. She was going to take care of me. Finally, after years of being the giver, I would be allowed to receive. But taking care of me had turned out to mean something very different than I'd imagined. The first sign should have been the way she and Marcus had immediately begun discussing the house's value at the funeral reception. I'd been greeting mourners, accepting casseroles and condolences, when I'd overheard them talking to Jennifer's real estate colleague about recent sales in our neighborhood. "Properties like this are gold mines right now," the colleague had said, eyeing our Victorian's original hardwood floors and period details. "Location, character, the works. Have you thought about what Margaret's planning to do?" "We're still processing everything," Jennifer had replied. But I'd caught the look she'd exchanged with Marcus. Obviously, Mom can't manage a place this size on her own. Obviously. As if my age and grief had somehow erased my competence, my decades of successful business management, my ability to make decisions about my own life, as if becoming a widow had automatically rendered me incapable of basic adult functions. Now, sitting in this sterile room that smelled like other people's endings, I finally understood. Every loan we'd made that was never repaid, every gift that was expected rather than appreciated, every crisis that had required our financial intervention while Jennifer built her own wealth, it had all been preparation for this moment. We had been ATMs, not parents. Our love had been a resource to be extracted, not a relationship to be cherished. I reached into my purse and pulled out the one photo I'd managed to grab before they rushed me out of my own home. Leo and me on our wedding day, 48 years ago. We looked so young, so hopeful, so absolutely certain that love and hard work would be enough to build a beautiful life. We'd been right about the beautiful life. We'd just been wrong about who would get to keep it. For the first time since Leo's death, I allowed myself to think a thought that felt like betrayal. Was I used? The question hung in the air of my tiny room like smoke, impossible to ignore once it had been released. And with it came another thought, even more devastating. Had Jennifer been planning this from the moment Leo was diagnosed? Had she been waiting for him to die so she could take everything we'd built together? I looked around room 247. The institutional furniture, the single window, the bathroom barely large enough for one person, and realized this was what a lifetime of unconditional love had earned me. This was my reward for being the perfect mother, the sacrificial parent, the woman who put everyone else's needs before her own. This was where unconditional generosity had led me, to a room where I would live on other people's schedules, eat other people's food, and exist at other people's convenience until I died. And somewhere across town, in the house Leo had built with his own hands, Jennifer and Marcus were probably already planning renovations. The first week at Sunset Manor passed like a fever dream. I kept expecting to wake up in my own bed, smell Leo's coffee brewing downstairs, hear the familiar creaks of our old house settling into another morning. Instead, I woke to the sound of medication carts rattling down hallways and the distant conversations of staff members who spoke about residents like we weren't there. "Room 247 needs her blood pressure checked," I heard a nurse say outside my door. Not Margaret. Not Mrs. Sullivan. Room 247. I'd become a number, a task on someone's checklist, a problem to be managed efficiently between more important responsibilities. The transformation from person to patient happened so quickly I almost missed it, like watching my reflection fade in a darkening window. My birthday came 6 days after my arrival, 74 years old, and for the first time in my adult life, I woke up alone with no one to acknowledge the anniversary of my existence. I lay in the narrow bed staring at the ceiling tiles, industrial white squares with tiny holes that looked like they were screaming, and waited for the phone to ring. It didn't ring at 9 a.m., when Jennifer usually called with her rushed, "Happy birthday, Mom," before diving into her busy schedule. It didn't ring at noon, when she might remember between client meetings. It didn't ring at all. I spent the day sitting in the common room, watching other residents receive visits from children and grandchildren who brought flowers, homemade cards, and the kind of genuine smiles that I realized I hadn't seen from Jennifer in years. Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter, maybe 8 years old, had drawn a picture of them holding hands under a rainbow. She'd taped it to her grandmother's walker with serious concentration, explaining each crayon mark like it was a masterpiece. "That's you, Grandma. And that's me. And we're at the park where you taught me to feed the ducks. See? The ducks are happy because they love you just like I do." I excused myself and went back to my room before anyone could see me crying. Jennifer finally called 3 days later, her voice bright with the artificial cheer she used when she felt guilty about something. "Mom, I'm so sorry I missed your birthday." Marcus and I were in Seattle for a real estate conference, and it was completely crazy. You know how these work trips are. I'd seen her social media posts from that weekend. Expensive restaurants, wine tastings, a couple's spa day at a luxury resort. She'd captioned one photo, "Working hard, playing harder," with emojis of champagne glasses and hearts. "It's all right, honey," I heard myself saying, automatically absolving her the way I'd been trained to do for 37 years. "I know you're busy. I'll make it up to you," she said. But even as she spoke, I could hear the clicking of her computer keyboard. She was multitasking, conducting our conversation while handling more important matters. "Maybe we can have lunch soon, when things calm down." Things never calmed down in Jennifer's world. There was always another client, another deadline, another conference, another excuse. Soon had become her favorite word, a promise that meant nothing because it never came with an actual date. 2 weeks later, I fell in the shower. The grab bars at Sunset Manor were positioned for average-height people, and at 5'2", I couldn't reach them properly when I slipped on the perpetually damp floor. I hit my hip hard enough to leave a bruise the size of a dinner plate, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I'd broken something important. The nursing staff was competent but clinical. They checked for fractures, documented the incident, and recommended I shower only when an aide was available to assist. The aide, a kind but overworked woman named Rosa, who spoke English as a second language, could only help me twice a week. I called Jennifer that afternoon, my voice shaky as I explained what had happened. "Honey, I had an accident. I'm okay, but it scared me. Could you maybe come visit? I'd love to see you." "Oh, Mom, that sounds awful," she said, and I could hear genuine concern in her voice for about 3 seconds before it shifted to problem-solving mode. "Have you talked to the staff about getting better grab bars? You should probably speak to the administrator. This is exactly why we chose Sunset Manor. They're supposed to have excellent safety protocols." We? They'd chosen this place. I'd had no input in the decision, no opportunity to visit other facilities, no voice in determining where I would spend whatever years I had left. "I was hoping maybe you could come see me," I repeated, hating how small my voice sounded. "It's been 2 weeks since—" "I know, Mom, and I feel terrible about that. Work has been insane. But hey, maybe this weekend? Let me check my calendar and get back to you." She didn't call back. When I tried calling her 3 days later, it went straight to voicemail. Her message was professional and upbeat. "Hi, you've reached Jennifer Sullivan Morrison. I'm either with a client or closing another deal. Leave a message and I'll get back to you soon." Soon. That word again. I started noticing things about the other residents that I'd been too numb to see during my first weeks. Mrs. Chen in room 251 had 3 sons who visited every Sunday, bringing dim sum from her favorite restaurant and staying for hours to play cards and share neighborhood gossip. Mr. Rodriguez's daughter came twice a week with her toddler, who called him abuelo, and climbed onto his lap to hear stories about Puerto Rico. But there were others like me, Mrs. Williams, whose son lived 20 minutes away but hadn't visited in 6 months. Mr. Thompson, whose daughter sent expensive fruit baskets instead of spending time with him. The forgotten ones, warehoused by families who'd convinced themselves that paying for professional care was the same as providing love. We formed an unspoken club, those of us who watched the visiting hours come and go with empty chairs beside us. We'd make excuses for our absent children. They're so busy, they work so hard, they have their own families to worry about, as if saying it enough times would make it hurt less. The day I discovered what Jennifer had really done with my house was the day something inside me finally broke completely. I'd been at Sunset Manor for 6 weeks when Mrs. Patterson mentioned seeing a moving truck at that beautiful Victorian on Cedar Street. My heart lurched with sudden hope. Maybe Jennifer had decided to move back into the family home. Maybe she wanted to preserve the place where she'd grown up. Maybe she understood its value beyond the financial. I asked Rosa if I could use the computer in the activity room to check the local real estate listings. My hands trembled as I typed our address into the search bar, and what I found made my vision blur with rage and disbelief. Stunning Victorian renovation. Completely updated luxury home in prestigious Cedar Heights neighborhood. $850,000. $850,000. For the house Leo had bought for $32,000 in 1981. For the home we'd spent 42 years improving, repairing, and filling with love. The photos showed rooms I barely recognized. Sterile modern fixtures where Leo's handmade shelves used to be. Granite countertops replacing the butcher block we'd saved for 3 years to buy. Hardwood floors stripped and restained to remove the scuff marks that told the story of our life together. They'd erased us completely. Every trace of the family who'd lived there. Every evidence of the love that had filled those rooms. Every memory that had made it a home rather than just a house. Gone. The listing agent was Jennifer. I sat in that activity room, surrounded by jigsaw puzzles and large print books, and felt something fundamental shift inside my chest. It wasn't grief anymore, or even anger. It was a cold, clear understanding of exactly who my daughter was and what I meant to her. She hadn't just stolen my home, she'd commodified it, turning the place where she'd learned to walk and said her first words and had her birthday parties into a business transaction. She was profiting from erasing her own childhood, selling the memories of our family like they were just another real estate commodity. The description was full of phrases like original character and period details and lovingly maintained, words that described Leo's craftsmanship and my care, without acknowledging that real people had created those features through decades of hard work and attention. We'd become anonymous previous owners, our contributions reduced to selling points for someone else's dream home. That night, I called Jennifer's number and left a message I never thought I'd have the courage to speak. Jennifer, I saw the listing. I know what you've done. Call me back. She didn't call back. I tried Marcus's number. Voicemail. I even called their house phone, the landline they'd kept for business purposes. The recorded message was Jennifer's voice, bright and professional. You've reached the Morrison residence. We're probably out showing houses or living our best life. Leave a message. Living their best life. On the proceeds from selling my life. 3 more days passed without a response. I began to understand that my daughter, the child I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through countless illnesses, cheered through every milestone, supported through every crisis, was actively avoiding me. Not because she was busy or overwhelmed or dealing with her own problems, but because she simply didn't want to face what she'd done. The silence became a weapon, more cruel than any argument or confrontation. At least anger would have acknowledged my existence, my right to feel betrayed and hurt. The silence reduced me to nothing, made me invisible even in my own story. I started having conversations with Leo in my head, long rambling discussions about what we should do, how we should handle Jennifer's betrayal. Sometimes I caught myself speaking out loud, and other residents would look at me with the kind of gentle pity reserved for people who were losing their grip on reality. But I wasn't losing my mind. I was losing my illusions. For 74 years, I'd believed that love was supposed to be unconditional, that mothers gave without expecting anything in return, that family meant something sacred and permanent. I'd believed that sacrificing for your children was noble, that putting their needs before your own was what good parents did. I'd believed that Jennifer loved me back. Now, sitting in a room that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams, I finally understood the truth. I had raised a stranger. The little girl who used to crawl into my lap when she was scared, who'd made me Mother's Day cards with construction paper and glitter, who'd cried in my arms when her first boyfriend broke her heart. That child had grown into a woman who could steal her mother's home and then ghost her when confronted with the consequences. I pulled out my photo of Leo and me on our wedding day, the one picture I'd managed to save from my previous life. We looked so young, so hopeful, so absolutely certain that love would be enough. We gave her everything. I whispered to his face in the photograph, and she took it all. But even as I said it, I realized something else. She could only take what I had been willing to give. For 37 years, I had trained my daughter to see me as a resource rather than a person, a bank account rather than a mother who deserved respect and consideration. I had taught her to expect my unconditional generosity by never setting any conditions. I had shown her that my love came without limits by never establishing any boundaries. I had demonstrated that she could take everything I had by never requiring her to give anything back. The question that had been haunting me for weeks finally crystallized into something sharper and more painful. Had I created the daughter who destroyed me? And if I had, what was I going to do about it? It took Jennifer 5 days to respond to my voicemail about the house. 5 days of silence that felt like psychological warfare, designed to make me question whether I had any right to feel betrayed by my own daughter's actions. When she finally called, her voice carried that particular tone she'd perfected over the years, the one that mixed wounded innocence with just enough irritation to make me feel guilty for bringing up uncomfortable topics. "Mom, I got your message," she began, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. Even this conversation wasn't important enough to stop working. "I'm really hurt that you'd think I did something wrong. We've been trying to handle Dad's estate responsibly, and frankly, I'm surprised you're questioning our judgment." Our judgment. Dad's estate. The language was calculated to exclude me from decisions about my own life, to frame my concerns as unreasonable interference in matters beyond my understanding. "Jennifer," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected, "that house has been my home for 42 years. Leo and I built our life there. You moved me out and sold it without even discussing it with me." "Mom, we discussed this extensively before Dad died," she replied, and I could hear the eye roll in her voice. "The house was too much for you to maintain. You were struggling with the inn, falling behind on maintenance, letting things slip. We made the responsible choice." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I almost believed her. Had we discussed this? Had I agreed to something during the fog of grief that I couldn't remember? But no, I remembered every conversation from those dark weeks after Leo's death, and none of them had involved me agreeing to give up my home. "I never agreed to sell the house," I said quietly. "I signed papers you told me were for tax reasons." "They were for tax reasons," Jennifer snapped, her patience clearly wearing thin. "Estate taxes, inheritance planning, protecting the family assets." "God, Mom, we can't explain every legal detail to you. That's why you have children who understand these things." Children who understand. As if my 74 years of managing finances, running a business, and making adult decisions had somehow rendered me incompetent to understand my own affairs. "Where did the money go?" I asked. $850,000. "Where is it?" The pause that followed was so long I thought the call had dropped. When Jennifer finally spoke, her voice had shifted into the cold, professional tone she used with difficult clients. "The money is being managed appropriately. Dad's medical bills, outstanding debts, estate taxes. You have no idea how complicated these things are. Marcus has been working with our financial advisor to ensure everything is handled correctly." Marcus. Their financial advisor. Notice how I wasn't included in any of these crucial decisions about my own financial future. Notice how my husband's medical bills, which I'd been managing just fine for 2 years, had suddenly become too complex for me to understand. "I want to see the paperwork," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I want to know exactly where my money went." "Your money?" Jennifer's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Mom, you're living in a fantasy. You're in assisted living now because you couldn't take care of yourself. We're paying for your care, managing your affairs, making sure you're safe and comfortable. And instead of being grateful, you're accusing us of stealing?" Grateful. There it was. The word that had been hanging between us for weeks like a sword waiting to fall. I was supposed to be grateful for being displaced from my home, grateful for being warehoused with strangers, grateful for having my life decisions made by other people who clearly knew better than I did. "I didn't ask to be in assisted living," I said, and for the first time in our conversation, my voice cracked with emotion. "I didn't ask for any of this. Mom, you're being dramatic. Sunset Manor is a beautiful facility with everything you need. You have activities, meals prepared for you, medical care available 24 hours a day. Most people would kill for that kind of security in their golden years." Golden years. Another phrase designed to minimize my feelings, to suggest that isolation and institutional living were somehow privileges I should embrace rather than losses to be grieved. "I had everything I needed in my own home," I whispered. "You had a falling down Victorian that was bleeding you dry," Jennifer shot back. "Mom, the roof needed replacing. The furnace was ancient. The plumbing was a disaster waiting to happen. You were one major repair away from bankruptcy. Every criticism felt like a personal attack, not just on the house, but on Leo's craftsmanship, on our life together, on the choices we'd made as a family. That roof had protected us through 42 Oregon winters. That furnace had kept Jennifer warm through her entire childhood. That plumbing had never failed us once. Leo maintained that house perfectly, I said, my voice gaining strength as I defended his memory. Dad was a carpenter, not a miracle worker, Jennifer replied coldly. He did his best, but the house needed professional updates that you couldn't afford. We saved you from making a huge financial mistake. Saved me. As if losing my home, my independence, and my dignity was somehow a rescue operation rather than a calculated theft. Then why? I asked, the words coming out harder than I'd intended. Why are you the listing agent? If you were so worried about my finances, why didn't you suggest I sell it myself and keep the money? Another long pause. When Jennifer spoke again, her voice had the carefully controlled quality of someone who'd been caught in a lie and was trying to find an acceptable way out. Mom, selling real estate is complicated. There are legal issues, market timing, negotiations with buyers. You would have gotten taken advantage of by unscrupulous agents. We protected you by handling it professionally, protected me by ensuring they got the commission, protected me by making sure I had no control over the sale price, the timing, or the terms, protected me right out of my own home and into institutional care while they profited from my life's work. I want to see Marcus, I said suddenly. I want him to explain exactly where the money went. Mom, Marcus is incredibly busy right now. We're expanding the business, taking on new commercial properties. He doesn't have time to walk you through financial documents you wouldn't understand anyway. Too busy. Wouldn't understand. The familiar refrains of a family that had decided I was no longer capable of participating in my own life. Jennifer, I said, and something in my tone must have warned her that I was reaching my limit. I raised you better than this. Don't. Her voice turned sharp as a blade. Don't you dare try to guilt me about how you raised me. You and Dad gave me everything, yes, but you also taught me to be responsible, to plan for the future, to make smart decisions. That's exactly what we're doing. Smart decisions. Was that what she called stealing from your mother? Was that the value system Leo and I had somehow instilled in our daughter? That family members were resources to be exploited rather than people to be loved? When can I come home? I asked, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew the answer. Mom, Sunset Manor is your home now. You need to accept that and start focusing on building a new life there. Join the activities, make friends, find ways to be happy. Stop dwelling on the past. Stop dwelling on the past. As if 42 years of marriage, parenthood, and building a life together was just nostalgia to be discarded when it became inconvenient for other people's plans. I want to see you, I said, making one last attempt to connect with whatever remnant of my daughter might still exist somewhere beneath this cold, calculating stranger. Can you come visit this weekend? I'll try, Jennifer said, but her tone suggested she was already mentally moving on to more important matters. This weekend might be tough. We have 3 open houses scheduled and a commercial property closing on Monday, but I'll see what I can do. She wouldn't come. I knew it with the certainty that comes from years of broken promises and postponed plans. Jennifer would find reasons to avoid visiting, just like she'd found reasons to avoid my birthday, my phone calls, and my questions about the house sale. After we hung up, I sat in my small room staring at the phone, trying to process what had just happened. My daughter had systematically dismantled every concern I'd raised, turned every question back on me as evidence of my own inadequacy, and made me feel guilty for even asking about my own money and property. It was masterful manipulation, so smooth and practiced that I almost couldn't see it happening. Jennifer had learned how to use my love against me, how to weaponize my trust, how to make me feel selfish for expecting basic honesty and respect from my own child. The next day, I called Marcus directly at his office. If Jennifer wouldn't give me straight answers, maybe her husband would be more forthcoming about what they'd done with my money. His secretary, a young woman with a voice like honey over steel, informed me that Mr. Morrison was in meetings all day, but would definitely get back to me soon. When I explained that I was his mother-in-law and needed to discuss urgent financial matters, her tone shifted slightly. "Oh, Mrs. Sullivan, Marcus has told me so much about you. He's mentioned how grateful they are that you're getting such wonderful care at Sunset Manor. I'll make sure he knows you called." Grateful they are. Past tense. As if my care was something they'd arranged and paid for rather than something I was funding with my own money. Money from the house they'd stolen and sold. Marcus never called back. I tried reaching them at home in the evenings, but their landline seemed to be constantly busy or going to voicemail. Their cell phones went straight to voicemail after one ring, suggesting they'd blocked my number or were deliberately screening my calls. The isolation was deliberate and cruel. They'd created a situation where I couldn't access information about my own finances, couldn't get straight answers about what they'd done with my property, and couldn't even maintain regular contact with the only family I had left. 2 weeks later, Jennifer finally showed up at Sunset Manor, not for a planned visit, but as an ambush designed to catch me off guard and emotionally vulnerable. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, sweeping into the common room where I was reading like a whirlwind of designer clothes and forced cheerfulness. She'd brought flowers, grocery store carnations, the kind of generic bouquet you grab when you need to look thoughtful but don't want to spend much money or effort. "Mom!" she exclaimed, loud enough for other residents and staff to hear. "You look wonderful. Doesn't she look wonderful, everyone?" The performance was for the audience, not for me. Jennifer wanted witnesses to see her being a loving, attentive daughter. She wanted the staff at Sunset Manor to think highly of her, to see her as the kind of person who visited her mother regularly and brought flowers. "You've lost weight," she continued, studying my face with what looked like genuine concern. "Are you eating enough? Are they taking good care of you here?" More performance. The caring daughter, worried about her mother's well-being in this place she'd never wanted to be. "I'm fine," I said quietly, not wanting to create a scene but feeling every eye in the room watching our interaction. "Can we talk privately?" "Of course," Jennifer beamed. "Let's go to your room. I want to see how you've decorated it." My room, with its single window and institutional furniture, looked exactly the same as it had when she'd abandoned me there 2 months ago. I hadn't decorated anything because it wasn't home and never would be. Once we were alone, Jennifer's demeanor shifted subtly. The bright smile remained, but her eyes grew calculating, watchful. "Mom, I'm worried about you," she began, settling into the room's single chair like she was preparing for a long conversation. "The staff mentioned that you've been making a lot of phone calls, asking questions about financial matters. They're concerned that you might be developing some confusion about your situation." The staff. She'd been talking to my caregivers, positioning herself as the concerned family member who needed to be kept informed about my mental state. She was building a narrative about my competency, creating documentation that could be used against me if I continued to ask uncomfortable questions. "I'm not confused," I said evenly. "I know exactly what happened to my house." "Mom?" Jennifer sighed, and the sound was pure condescension. "We've been over this. The house sale was necessary and appropriate. I'm starting to think that maybe you need to talk to someone professional about processing these changes. Grief can manifest in many ways, and sometimes people fixate on things that feel out of their control. Professional help." Another threat disguised as concern. If I continued to resist their version of events, they'd have me evaluated for mental competency. They'd use my questions about my own finances as evidence that I was becoming unstable, unreliable, in need of even more external management. The trap was closing around me, and I finally understood just how calculated this entire operation had been. Jennifer and Marcus hadn't just stolen my house. They'd positioned themselves as my protectors, my caretakers, the responsible parties who knew what was best for me. And if I fought back, they'd use my resistance as proof that I needed even more protection from my own poor judgment. I looked at my daughter sitting in that institutional chair, her expression mixing fake concern with real irritation, and realized that this person had become my enemy, not through some sudden transformation, but through years of training me to accept less and less respect while giving more and more of myself. The little girl who used to tell me she loved me to the moon and back had grown into a woman who would steal my home and then gaslight me about my own memories of what had happened. and she was just getting started. The morning after Jennifer's manipulative visit, I woke up with something I hadn't felt in months: rage. Not the hollow sadness that had been my constant companion, not the confused hurt that had made me question my own perceptions, but pure, clean anger that burned through the fog of grief and self-doubt like a lighthouse cutting through storm clouds. I was done being managed, manipulated, and marginalized by my own daughter. That afternoon, I asked Rosa to help me get to the bank. Just some errands, I told her, not ready to explain that I was about to declare war on my own family. Rosa, bless her heart, didn't ask questions. She simply called me a taxi and made sure I had the address written clearly on a piece of paper. First National Bank sat on the corner of Morrison and 3rd, a solid brick building where Leo and I had done business for 37 years, where we'd gotten our first home loan, opened savings accounts for Jennifer's education, and planned our modest retirement. Walking through those glass doors felt like stepping back into my real life, the one where I was Margaret Sullivan, business owner and decision maker, not room 247, the confused elderly woman who needed other people to think for her. The young teller looked at me with polite patience as I explained what I needed. "I'd like to see my account statements going back 6 months, I said, sliding my identification across the marble counter. All accounts associated with my Social Security number. What I discovered sitting in that small conference room, reading through page after page of transactions, was worse than I'd imagined. Not only had Jennifer and Marcus drained the joint savings account Leo and I had built over 4 decades, but they'd also been systematically withdrawing money from my personal checking account, the one that received my Social Security payments and Leo's pension benefits. $500 here, $800 there, always with withdrawal slips that bore my forged signature. They'd been stealing from me for months, probably since before Leo died, taking money directly from the income I needed to survive. The house sale proceeds, all $850,000, had been deposited into an account I'd never seen before, one that listed me as a secondary account holder, but required both Jennifer's and Marcus's signatures for any withdrawals. My own money, locked away where I couldn't access it without their permission. But here's what they hadn't counted on. Leo had been more careful with money than even I had realized. Hidden in the paperwork was an old savings account he'd opened during his first year of retirement, one he'd never mentioned to Jennifer because he'd wanted to surprise me with a trip to Ireland for our 50th anniversary. $15,000. Not a fortune, but enough to change everything. "I'd like to close this account," I told the bank manager, a middle-aged woman named Patricia who'd known Leo personally. "And I'd like the funds transferred to a new account that only I can access." Patricia studied the account information, then looked at me with the careful expression of someone navigating potentially dangerous territory. "Mrs. Sullivan, are you sure about this? Closing a long-term savings account can have tax implications. And if you're planning to use this money for care at Sunset Manor, there might be better options." "I'm not planning to stay at Sunset Manor," I heard myself saying, the words surprising me as much as they surprised her. "I'm planning to take back my life." Walking out of that bank with my new debit card and checkbook felt like the first free breath I'd taken in months. For the first time since Leo's death, I had money that was mine alone, decisions that were mine to make, and a future that wasn't being determined by other people's convenience. My next stop was the most difficult one: Sunset Manor's administrative office. "Mrs. Sullivan," the director said, looking genuinely surprised when I appeared at her door without an appointment. "What can I help you with today? Is everything all right with your room?" "I'd like to discuss my payment arrangements," I said, settling into the chair across from her desk with more confidence than I'd felt in months. "Specifically, I'd like to know who's been paying my fees." The director consulted her computer, scrolling through screens of information that apparently contained the details of my financial captivity. "Your account is managed by your daughter, Jennifer Morrison. She handles all payments and correspondence related to your care." "I'd like to take over my own account," I said simply. "I want to pay my own fees and receive my own statements." "Well," the director said carefully, "that's certainly possible, but we'd need to contact Jennifer first. She's listed as your financial power of attorney, which means—" "When did she become my power of attorney?" I interrupted. my blood pressure rising with each revelation of how thoroughly I'd been trapped. More scrolling, more consultation of documents I'd apparently signed without understanding their implications. It looks like, yes, here it is. The papers were filed 2 weeks after your husband's death. Standard estate planning documents, very common in these situations. Standard, common. More evidence that my complete loss of autonomy had been packaged as normal, responsible family planning. But I remembered those papers now, the ones Jennifer had presented to me during those first dark weeks after Leo's funeral, explaining them as tax forms and insurance paperwork that needed my signature to protect the family assets. I'd signed away my right to make my own financial decisions while I was drowning in grief, and Jennifer had used my trust and confusion against me like a weapon. I want to revoke the power of attorney, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. Today, I want to manage my own affairs. The director looked uncomfortable, the way people do when they're witnessing family drama they don't want to get involved in. Mrs. Sullivan, that's a legal matter that would need to be handled through proper channels. You'd need to consult with an attorney, file the appropriate documents. Then help me find an attorney, I said. Today, 3 hours later, I was sitting in the office of Elizabeth Harper, a family law attorney who specialized in elder rights. Her office was warm and comfortable, filled with books and family photos that suggested she understood the importance of dignity and respect in human relationships. Mrs. Sullivan, she said after I'd explained my situation, what you're describing sounds like financial elder abuse. It's unfortunately more common than people realize, and it's often perpetrated by family members who justify their actions as being in the best interest of their elderly relatives. Financial elder abuse. Having a name for what had been done to me felt like finally getting a diagnosis for a painful illness. Terrifying, but also validating. Proof that my suffering was real and not just the confused complaints of an aging mind. The power of attorney documents were probably legally valid when you signed them, Elizabeth continued. But that doesn't mean they can't be challenged, especially if you can demonstrate that you were manipulated or coerced into signing them during a period of vulnerability. What about my house? I asked. Can I get it back? Elizabeth's expression grew more serious. That's more complicated. If the transfer was completed using a valid power of attorney, and if the property has already been sold to a third party, recovering the asset might be impossible, but we might be able to pursue compensation if we can prove the sale was not in your best interest. For the first time in our conversation, I felt tears threatening. They took everything, I whispered. My home, my money, my independence. They made me feel crazy for even questioning what they were doing. That's part of the abuse pattern, Elizabeth said gently. Gaslighting, isolation, making the victim question their own perception of reality. It's a form of psychological manipulation that's particularly effective against elderly people who are already dealing with grief or illness. She leaned forward, her expression fierce and determined. But here's what they didn't count on, Mrs. Sullivan. You're here in my office, asking for help, refusing to accept their version of reality. That takes tremendous courage and strength. You're not the helpless victim they've tried to make you believe you are. Courage and strength. When had anyone last used those words to describe me? For months, I'd been told I was confused, incompetent, in need of protection from my own poor judgment. Having someone recognize my fight as brave rather than troublesome felt like water to a woman dying of thirst. What do we do first? I asked. First, we file papers to revoke the power of attorney. We'll need to demonstrate that you're mentally competent to make your own decisions, which might require a psychological evaluation. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Jennifer's threats, her suggestions that I needed professional help to deal with my confusion about the house sale. If she wanted to play the competency game, I was ready to prove exactly how competent I was. Yes, I said firmly. I'm ready. Second, we file a complaint with Adult Protective Services regarding the financial abuse. That will trigger an investigation into how your assets were handled. Will that create problems for Jennifer? The question surprised me even as I asked it. After everything she'd done, some part of me was still worried about protecting my daughter from the consequences of her own actions. The maternal instinct to shield her from harm was so deeply ingrained that it persisted even when she was the one causing the harm. "Mrs. Sullivan," Elizabeth said carefully, "I need you to understand something. What Jennifer and Marcus have done to you is criminal. It's theft, fraud, and elder abuse. The problems they face are problems they created through their own choices. You are not responsible for protecting them from accountability." That night, back in my small room at Sunset Manor, I called Jennifer, not to argue or plead or seek explanations, but to deliver a message that would change everything between us. "Jennifer," I said when she answered with her usual rushed, distracted tone, "I've retained an attorney. I'm revoking the power of attorney you tricked me into signing, and I'm filing a complaint about the financial abuse." The silence that followed was so complete I thought the call had disconnected. When Jennifer finally spoke, her voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Mom, what have you done?" "I've taken back my life," I said, and hung up the phone. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking up in a panic about my future. I dreamed about Leo, and in the dream, he was smiling. "That's my girl," he said in the dream. "I knew you had fight left in you." I woke up feeling something I'd almost forgotten existed: hope. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. But for the first time since this nightmare started, I was fighting back instead of just enduring. I was no longer Room 247, the confused elderly woman who needed other people to manage her life. I was Margaret Sullivan, and I was done being anyone's victim. The next morning, I did something that felt revolutionary. I made my own decisions about my own day. Instead of sitting in the common room waiting for someone else to determine my schedule, I walked to the nearby coffee shop and ordered my first real cup of coffee in months. I sat by the window, watching people hurry past on their way to jobs and lives and purposes, and remembered what it felt like to be a person with agency and choice. I pulled out my phone and called the taxi company. "I'd like to schedule a ride," I said. "I'm going apartment hunting." Because the first step in taking back my life was deciding where I wanted to live it, and it wasn't going to be in Room 247. Jennifer and Marcus showed up at Sunset Manor the next morning like a SWAT team executing a raid. I was in the garden, sitting on a bench and reading the apartment listings I'd printed at the library when I heard the commotion at the front desk. "Where is she?" Jennifer's voice carried across the lobby, sharp with panic and barely controlled rage. "Where's my mother? We need to speak with her immediately." Through the glass doors, I could see them both. Jennifer in a severe black suit that made her look like she was attending a funeral. Marcus in his expensive wool coat, both of them radiating the kind of aggressive energy that comes from people who've been cornered and are preparing to fight their way out. I stood up slowly, folded my apartment listings, and walked inside to face them. After 74 years of avoiding confrontation, of smoothing over difficult conversations, of protecting other people's feelings at the expense of my own truth, I was finally ready for war. "Mom!" Jennifer rushed toward me, her expression a calculated mixture of relief and wounded innocence. "Thank God you're okay. We were so worried when we got your call last night. You sounded confused." Confused. Even now, even when I'd explicitly told her I was taking legal action, she was still trying to paint me as mentally incompetent. The gaslighting was so automatic, so reflexive, that I don't think she even realized she was doing it anymore. "I'm not confused," I said clearly, loud enough for the staff and other residents to hear. "I know exactly what you've done to me." Marcus stepped forward, his face arranged in the patronizing smile he'd perfected over 12 years of marriage to my daughter. "Margaret, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Why don't we go somewhere private where we can discuss this calmly? Private, where they could manipulate me without witnesses, where they could use their practiced emotional weapons without an audience to see through their performance." "No," I said simply. "We can discuss it right here." The word hung in the air between us like a declaration of independence. For the first time in our relationship, I had told Marcus no, and the shock on his face was almost comical. He'd never heard that word from me before. None of them had. "Mom, you're embarrassing yourself," Jennifer hissed, glancing around at the small crowd of residents and staff who'd gathered to watch the drama unfold. "People are staring. Let them stare. Let them see what Jennifer and Marcus Morrison really were when their carefully constructed facade cracked under pressure. Let them witness what happened when the family scapegoat finally refused to carry the weight of everyone else's guilt and greed. "You stole my house," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the lobby. "You forged my signature on bank documents. You manipulated me into signing over power of attorney while I was grieving my husband's death, and then you abandoned me here like I was garbage." "That's not what happened," Jennifer said quickly, but her voice had gone up an octave and her hands were shaking slightly. "Mom, you agreed to all of this. You were there when we discussed the estate planning. You signed the papers voluntarily. I signed papers you told me were for tax purposes," I replied. "I trusted you. I believed you when you said you were protecting me." "We were protecting you," Marcus interjected, his patience finally snapping. "Margaret, you couldn't manage that house anymore. You were falling behind on maintenance, letting the business fail, making poor financial decisions. We saved you from bankruptcy." The lie was so bold, so completely contradicted by the evidence I'd discovered at the bank, that I almost laughed. But then I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. He actually believed what he was saying. He'd convinced himself that stealing from me was somehow a favor, that fraud was protection, that destroying my life was really saving it. "Show me the bankruptcy paperwork," I said calmly. "Show me the bills I couldn't pay. Show me evidence of any financial crisis that justified stealing $850,000 from me." "It wasn't stealing," Jennifer said, but her voice had lost its conviction. "The money is being managed responsibly. It's still your money, Mom. We're just making sure it's handled properly. Then give it back to me." The simple request landed like a bomb in the middle of their elaborate justifications. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and I could see them mentally scrambling for a response that would make their theft sound reasonable. "Mom, you can't just liquidate that much money without careful planning," Jennifer finally said. "There are tax implications, investment strategies, long-term care considerations. You need professional management." Professional management. By her husband, who stood to profit from every transaction, every decision, every movement of my money. Professional management that somehow never included consulting with me about my own financial future. "I've hired my own professional," I said, pulling Elizabeth Harper's business card from my pocket. "An attorney who specializes in elder abuse cases. She's very interested in how you obtained power of attorney and what you've done with my assets." The color drained from Marcus's face so quickly I thought he might faint. Jennifer grabbed his arm, her fingernails digging into his expensive coat, and I saw them exchange a look of pure panic. "You can't be serious," Jennifer whispered. "Mom, we're family. You don't sue family over misunderstandings." Misunderstandings. As if systematic theft and emotional abuse were just communication problems that could be resolved with better explanation. "You stopped being my family the moment you decided I was a resource to be exploited instead of a mother to be loved," I said, and my voice didn't waver once. Marcus leaned forward, his mask of politeness finally slipping completely. "You ungrateful old woman. Do you have any idea what we've sacrificed for you? The time, the energy, the money we've spent managing your affairs? And this is how you repay us?" There it was. The truth, finally spoken aloud. They saw caring for me as a sacrifice, a burden, an inconvenience that justified whatever compensation they chose to take. My life, my home, my money, it was all payment for the terrible inconvenience of having to deal with an aging parent. "What have you sacrificed?" I asked quietly. "Name one thing you've given up for me." "We gave up our lives," Jennifer exploded, her careful composure finally cracking completely. "Every weekend dealing with your problems, every evening answering your panicked phone calls, every vacation interrupted because you needed something. Do you think it was easy watching Dad deteriorate? Do you think it was fun managing his medical care while trying to run our own business?" Medical care. The medical care I had provided, 24 hours a day, for 2 years while they made brief, obligatory visits. The medical care that had exhausted my savings and destroyed my health while they built their real estate empire with money stolen from my accounts. "When did you last sacrifice anything for me?" I asked. "When did you last put my needs before your own?" When did you last treat me like a person instead of a problem to be solved? The questions hung in the air unanswered because we all knew the truth. They couldn't remember a single instance of genuine sacrifice, genuine care, genuine love that didn't come with strings attached and benefits calculated. I'm done, I said, and the finality in my voice surprised even me. I'm done with your lies, your manipulation, your theft, and your complete lack of respect for the woman who gave you life and spent 37 years making yours better. Mom, please. Jennifer tried one last time, and for a moment her voice carried an echo of the little girl who used to crawl into my lap when she was scared. Don't do this. Don't destroy our family over money. Our family. As if what we'd had for the past several years could be called a family instead of a financial arrangement where I provided resources and they provided nothing in return. I reached into my purse and pulled out the one photograph I'd managed to save from my old life, the picture of Leo and me on our wedding day, young and hopeful, and so completely certain that love would be enough to build something beautiful. This was my family, I said, holding up the photo so they could see it. This was love. What you've given me isn't family. It's exploitation with holiday visits. I put the photo back in my purse and looked at them both, really looked at them, for what I knew would be the last time. Jennifer with her designer clothes and cold eyes, Marcus with his expensive watch and calculating smile, strangers who happened to share my DNA and my history, but not my values, my integrity, or my capacity for genuine love. The attorney says I might not be able to get the house back, I continued, but I can make sure you face consequences for what you've done. Financial elder abuse is a felony in Oregon. Forging signatures on bank documents is fraud. Lying to obtain power of attorney is criminal conspiracy. You wouldn't? Marcus said, but his voice had gone weak with fear. Watch me, I replied. I turned and walked toward the elevator, leaving them standing in the lobby surrounded by witnesses who'd heard every word of our confrontation. Behind me, I could hear Jennifer's voice rising in panic as she tried to convince the staff that I was having an episode and not thinking clearly. But her voice was just noise now, background static that had no power to hurt me anymore. In my room, I sat on my narrow bed and called Elizabeth Harper. I want to file charges, I said when she answered. All of them. Fraud, theft, elder abuse, whatever you can make stick. I'm done protecting people who never protected me. Are you sure? Elizabeth asked gently. Once we file criminal charges, there's no going back. This will destroy your relationship with your daughter permanently. I looked around my small institutional room, thought about the house Leo built with his own hands, remembered the 48 years of marriage that had been erased and commodified by people who saw me as nothing more than a source of income. My relationship with my daughter was destroyed the moment she decided to steal my life, I said. I'm just making it official. That afternoon, I signed the papers that would change everything. Criminal complaints, civil lawsuits, formal requests for investigation, document after document that transformed me from victim to prosecutor, from silent sufferer to active fighter. When I was done signing, Elizabeth leaned back in her chair and smiled. Mrs. Sullivan, I have to tell you, in 20 years of practicing elder law, I've never seen someone fight back this decisively. Most people are too afraid of losing their family relationships to hold their abusers accountable. I already lost my family relationship, I said. They threw it away when they decided my love was worth less than my bank account. I'm just acknowledging what they already chose. Walking out of that law office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Pride. Not the desperate gratitude I'd felt when Jennifer occasionally showed me attention, not the nervous hope that maybe this time she'd treat me with respect, but genuine pride in my own strength and dignity. I was 74 years old, and I had just declared war on my own daughter. And for the first time in years, I felt like myself again. 3 weeks after the confrontation, I found myself standing in front of a small cottage on Maple Street, holding keys that belonged to me and no one else. The rental agreement was in my name only. The deposit had come from my own bank account. And for the first time in months, I was looking at a door that I could walk through whenever I wanted, lock behind me whenever I chose, and call home without anyone's permission. The cottage wasn't much to look at from the outside. White clapboard siding that needed fresh paint, a small front porch with loose boards, window boxes that held nothing but old soil and dead stems, but it was mine. Mine to improve or leave imperfect, mine to fill with whatever made me happy, mine to live in according to my own rhythms and preferences. Elizabeth had warned me that the legal proceedings would take months, possibly years, and that I shouldn't count on recovering any substantial money from Jennifer and Marcus. Elder abuse cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute, she'd explained, and even when we win, collecting damages can be nearly impossible if the defendants have hidden their assets. But I wasn't doing this for the money anymore. I was doing it for something more valuable. My dignity, my truth, and the satisfaction of knowing that their actions would have consequences. Even if those consequences were just the inconvenience of dealing with lawyers and court dates, and the public exposure of what they'd really done to me. Moving out of Sunset Manor had been surprisingly simple once I'd demonstrated my legal competency to their satisfaction. The psychological evaluation Elizabeth had arranged had been almost insulting in its simplicity. Basic memory tests, logic puzzles, and questions about current events that any reasonably alert person could answer without difficulty. Mrs. Sullivan shows no signs of cognitive impairment, dementia, or mental illness, the psychologist had written in her report. She demonstrates clear understanding of her financial situation, living arrangements, and legal proceedings. Her decision-making capacity appears fully intact. Fully intact. Those words had felt like vindication, proof that every doubt Jennifer and Marcus had planted about my mental competency had been projection and manipulation rather than genuine concern. The staff at Sunset Manor had seemed genuinely surprised by my departure. "Are you sure you'll be all right on your own?" the director had asked, consulting her files as if they contained evidence that I was making a terrible mistake. "Living independently at your age can be challenging. What if you have a medical emergency? What if you fall? What if you can't manage the housework? What if? The endless catastrophizing that kept elderly people trapped in institutional care even when they were perfectly capable of managing their own lives. But I'd spent 2 years caring for Leo during his illness, managing his medications, coordinating his doctor visits, and handling every aspect of his daily care while simultaneously running our bed and breakfast. I thought I could probably manage to take care of myself. My first night in the cottage, I sat on the floor in my empty living room and ate takeout Chinese food directly from the container, while watching the sunset through windows that needed washing. The silence was profound. No institutional sounds. No overhead pages calling for staff assistance. No conversations floating through thin walls from neighboring rooms filled with other displaced people. Just silence. My silence. The kind of quiet that belonged to me and reflected my own choices rather than someone else's schedule. I called Rosa, the aide who'd been so kind to me at Sunset Manor, and asked if she'd be interested in helping me set up my new place on weekends. "Mrs. Margaret!" she'd exclaimed, her voice bright with genuine happiness. "You have your own house now? That's wonderful. Yes, I help you. We make it beautiful." Over the next month, Rosa and I transformed the cottage from a generic rental property into something that felt like home. We painted the living room a warm yellow that reminded me of the kitchen Leo and I had shared for so many years. We hung curtains I'd chosen myself, blue and white gingham that had nothing to do with anyone else's taste or opinions. We filled the window boxes with pansies and herbs, creating small bursts of color and life that I could tend and enjoy. For the first time in decades, I decorated according to my own preferences, rather than trying to please other people or maintain some standard of elegance that would impress visitors. I bought comfortable furniture from secondhand stores, choosing pieces because they felt good to sit in, rather than because they matched some coordinated design scheme. I hung photos of Leo and me throughout the house, not hidden away in a bedroom, but displayed proudly in the living room and kitchen where I could see them every day, and remember what love actually looked like. The cottage had a small backyard with an old apple tree and enough space for a vegetable garden. I spent hours every morning working in that garden, my hands in the soil, planning what to plant and where. Tomatoes along the fence where they'd get full sun, lettuce and spinach in the shadier spots, a small herb garden near the kitchen door where I could step out and pick fresh basil or oregano for whatever I was cooking. Cooking for myself turned out to be one of the unexpected joys of my new life. For months at Sunset Manor, I'd eaten meals prepared by other people on schedules determined by institutional efficiency rather than personal appetite. Breakfast at 8, lunch at 12, dinner at 5:30, whether I was hungry or not, whether I liked the food or not. Now I could eat when I wanted, what I wanted, how I wanted. I could have cereal for dinner if that's what sounded good. I could cook elaborate meals that took hours if I felt like spending time in the kitchen. I could skip meals entirely if I wasn't hungry, or eat 4 small meals instead of 3 large ones if that suited my body better. The simple freedom to make basic decisions about my own daily life felt revolutionary after months of having every choice made for me by other people who claimed to know what was best. 6 weeks after moving into the cottage, I was working in my garden when I heard a small voice behind me. "Excuse me, are you the lady who used to run the bed and breakfast on Cedar Street?" I turned to see a girl of maybe 10 years old, with red hair in braids and freckles across her nose. She was holding the hand of a woman who looked like an older version of her, probably her mother. "I am," I said, brushing soil off my hands. "I'm Margaret Sullivan." "I'm Emma," the girl said shyly. "My mom and I stayed at your inn 2 years ago when we came to visit Portland." "You made the best blueberry pancakes I ever had in my whole life." The woman stepped forward, smiling warmly. "I'm Sarah, Emma's mother. We live just 2 streets over. Emma has been talking about those pancakes for 2 years, and when we heard you were living in the neighborhood, she insisted we come find you." Something warm bloomed in my chest. Recognition, appreciation, the acknowledgement that my work had mattered to someone, had created memories worth preserving. At the Cedar Street Inn, I'd been known for my breakfast cooking, for the care I put into each meal, for the way I remembered guests' preferences and made them feel like family. "Would you like to come in for some lemonade?" I heard myself asking. "I might even have ingredients for pancakes if Emma is interested." Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? You'd make pancakes just for us?" Just for us. As if cooking for people who appreciated my efforts was some kind of sacrifice rather than pure joy. I realized that somewhere in the months of being told I was a burden, a problem to be managed, a source of inconvenience, I'd forgotten that my skills and care had value. I'd forgotten that hospitality was a gift I could give, not just a service I was expected to provide. That afternoon, cooking pancakes for Emma and Sarah in my small kitchen, I felt more like myself than I had in years. Emma sat at my kitchen table, swinging her legs and chattering about school and her friends, and her excitement about the pancakes. Sarah helped me set the table and shared stories about their travels, asking genuine questions about my life and experiences. "These are exactly how I remembered them," Emma announced after her first bite, maple syrup dripping down her chin. "Perfect. Perfect." When had anyone last called something I'd made perfect? When had anyone last appreciated my efforts without immediately pointing out what could be improved or suggesting changes I should make? As they prepared to leave, Sarah pressed a business card into my hand. "I run a small catering company," she explained. "Very small, very local, mostly breakfast and lunch events for book clubs and garden parties and things like that. If you're ever interested in some part-time work, I could really use someone with your experience and talents." Work. Real work, using skills I developed over decades, creating value that people would pay for. Not charity, not busy work designed to keep elderly people occupied, but genuine employment that would contribute to my independence and self-sufficiency. "I'll think about it," I said, though I was already thinking about it, already imagining myself back in a kitchen where my cooking was valued and appreciated. That evening, I called Elizabeth to update her on my new life and ask about the legal proceedings. The news was mixed. Jennifer and Marcus had hired expensive attorneys who were fighting every aspect of our case, but the Adult Protective Services investigation had found evidence of financial abuse and referred the matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. "They're scared," Elizabeth told me. "Really scared. Their lawyers are making noise about settlement negotiations, which tells me they know they're in serious trouble." "I don't want to settle," I said firmly. "I want this to go to court. I want their actions to be a matter of public record." "Are you sure?" "Settlement would mean faster resolution and probably some financial recovery." I looked around my small cottage, at the comfortable furniture I'd chosen myself, at the photos of Leo and me displayed openly on my mantel, at the herb garden visible through my kitchen window where I could grow my own basil and oregano. I don't need their money, I said. I need them to face consequences for what they did. I need other elderly people to see that they don't have to accept abuse from their own families. I need to know that I fought back. 2 months later, I was working with Sarah's catering company 3 days a week, cooking breakfast for events around Portland, book club meetings where intellectual women gathered to discuss literature over my homemade scones, garden club luncheons where I prepared fresh salads with vegetables grown by the club members themselves, baby showers where new mothers tasted my lemon bars and asked for the recipe. Each event reminded me that I had skills, talents, and experience that were valuable in the world. Each compliment about my cooking or presentation helped rebuild the confidence that Jennifer and Marcus had systematically destroyed through months of criticism and control. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. One evening, as I was watering my garden in the soft light of sunset, I found myself talking to Leo again. Not the desperate, grief-stricken conversations I'd had during my darkest days at Sunset Manor, but the comfortable, ongoing dialogue of a woman sharing her life with the memory of someone who truly loved her. "You should see the tomatoes this year," I told him, examining the heavy green fruit hanging from vines I'd staked myself. "I think this soil is even better than what we had on Cedar Street. And you'd love Sarah and Emma. Real people, you know? The kind who appreciate good food and honest work." The evening air was warm and still, filled with the scent of jasmine from my neighbor's fence and the earthy smell of well-tended soil. My small cottage glowed with yellow light from windows I'd hung curtains in, displaying the comfortable life I'd built for myself through my own choices and efforts. I was 74 years old, and I was finally free. Free to make my own decisions, manage my own finances, choose my own friends, and create my own daily rhythms. Free to say no when people asked for things I didn't want to give. Free to say yes to opportunities that brought me joy and satisfaction. Free to be Margaret Sullivan again, instead of Room 247 or the confused elderly woman who needed other people to think for her. For the first time since Leo's death, I felt genuinely happy. Not the desperate gratitude of someone clinging to scraps of kindness. Not the hollow satisfaction of having successfully avoided conflict, but the deep, steady happiness of a woman who liked her own life and looked forward to tomorrow. The legal battle with Jennifer and Marcus would continue for months, but it no longer defined my existence or consumed my emotional energy. It was just one aspect of a life that now included work I enjoyed, friends who valued me, and a home that reflected my own taste and preferences. I had reclaimed myself, and that was worth more than any amount of money they could have stolen. 1 year later, I stood in the courthouse in downtown Portland, watching my daughter and her husband sign a settlement agreement that would reshape the rest of my life. The marble floors echoed with the sound of expensive shoes and hushed legal conversations, but I felt only a profound sense of closure as Elizabeth Harper placed the final documents in front of me. The criminal charges had been dropped in exchange for full restitution. Every penny stolen from my accounts, plus damages for emotional distress and legal fees. Jennifer and Marcus would pay me $200,000 over the next 5 years, and their real estate licenses were permanently revoked. More importantly to me, the case had become a matter of public record, a cautionary tale about elder abuse that would follow them for the rest of their professional lives. Jennifer sat across the conference table from me, looking older than her 37 years. The stress of the legal proceedings had carved lines around her eyes and mouth, and her hands shook slightly as she signed each page. She'd lost weight, and her designer clothes hung loose on her frame. For a moment, looking at her, I felt the familiar maternal instinct to comfort and protect. But then I remembered the voice message that had started this journey. Cold, calculating, dismissive. I remembered standing on that foggy morning outside Sunset Manor, clutching my purse while she drove away without looking back. I remembered the months of gaslighting, manipulation, and systematic financial abuse. The woman signing those papers wasn't my daughter anymore. She was a stranger who had chosen greed over love, manipulation over honesty, and financial gain over family bonds. Whatever relationship we'd once had been destroyed by her choices, not mine. Mrs. Sullivan, the mediator asked, do you have any final statements you'd like to make? I looked at Jennifer, who was staring at the table, unable or unwilling to meet my eyes. Marcus sat beside her, his face a mask of barely controlled anger, clearly furious about being forced to face consequences for his actions. Yes, I said quietly. I want you both to know that this was never about the money. This was about dignity, respect, and the fundamental truth that you cannot steal someone's life and expect to face no consequences. You taught me that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's exploitation waiting to happen. Jennifer finally looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Mom, No. I interrupted gently but firmly. You made your choices. You chose to see me as a resource instead of a person. You chose to manipulate my grief and trust instead of honoring my independence. You chose to isolate me from my own life instead of supporting my autonomy. These were your choices, and now you live with the consequences. After the settlement was signed and everyone had left, Elizabeth and I sat in a coffee shop across from the courthouse, reviewing what the agreement meant for my future. With the settlement money and the restitution payments, she explained, you'll be financially secure for the rest of your life. You could buy a house, travel, do whatever you want. Whatever I wanted. At 75 years old, I finally had the resources and freedom to live entirely according to my own preferences. But what I wanted wasn't exotic travel or expensive possessions. What I wanted was to continue building the life I'd started in my little cottage on Maple Street. Sarah's catering business had grown into something larger, and she'd offered to make me a full partner. The Margaret Sullivan touch, she called my contribution. The attention to detail, the nurturing approach to hospitality, the way I could make any gathering feel like a family celebration. We were booking events 6 months in advance, and food critics had started mentioning our company in their reviews of Portland's culinary scene. At 75, I had accidentally built a career that fulfilled me in ways I'd never experienced before. Not just financially, but emotionally and creatively. Every event was different. Every menu was a new challenge. Every satisfied customer was validation that my skills and experience had value in the world. 6 months after the settlement, I did something that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. I bought my own house. Not a mansion, not a statement of wealth or status, but a perfect 2-bedroom craftsman bungalow with a large garden and enough space to host dinner parties for the friends I'd made through work and neighborhood connections. The house sat on a quiet street, lined with mature oak trees, surrounded by gardens that the previous owner had lovingly maintained for decades. It had hardwood floors that creaked in friendly ways, built-in bookshelves that held my small collection of cherished volumes, and a kitchen with enough counter space for serious cooking projects. Most importantly, it had a screened back porch where I could sit in the evenings with a cup of tea and watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and purple that reminded me of hope and possibility. Emma, now 11 years old and even more enthusiastic about my cooking, had become a regular visitor. She'd ride her bicycle over after school, ostensibly to help with my garden, but really just to talk about her day while I prepared dinner or worked on recipes for upcoming catering events. Mrs. Margaret, she said one afternoon as we were transplanting seedlings, my mom says you used to be really sad, but now you're the happiest person she knows. What changed? I considered her question seriously. The way you do when a child asks something profound disguised as casual conversation. What had changed? Everything, really. But the core transformation had been internal. The decision to stop accepting treatment that diminished my worth, to stop protecting people from the consequences of their own choices, to stop believing that love meant endless self-sacrifice without reciprocation. I learned the difference between being alone and being lonely, I told her, brushing soil from my hands. And I learned that sometimes you have to lose the family you were born into in order to find the family you choose. My chosen family now included Sarah and Emma, Rosa, who still helped me with heavy cleaning twice a month, the book club ladies who hired us for their monthly meetings and had started inviting me to join their literary discussions, and Mrs. Patterson from Sunset Manor, who had moved into senior housing nearby and came for dinner every Sunday. Real relationships, built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation or financial dependency. Relationships where I could be myself without constantly trying to earn love through service or sacrifice. One evening in late spring, as I was preparing for a garden party catering event the next day, my phone rang. The number was familiar but unwelcome. Jennifer's cell phone. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken since the courthouse settlement, and I'd built a life that didn't include the stress and manipulation that conversations with her inevitably brought. But something made me pick up on the fourth ring. "Mom?" Her voice was small, uncertain, nothing like the confident, professional tone I'd grown to dread. "Yes? I wanted to call and tell you something. Marcus and I are getting divorced." I waited for her to continue, feeling neither satisfaction nor sympathy, just a kind of detached interest in this information about strangers whose drama no longer affected my peace of mind. The stress of everything that happened, the financial problems, the legal issues, it destroyed our marriage, and I've been in therapy, trying to understand how I became the kind of person who could do what I did to you. Therapy. That was something, at least. Recognition that her behavior had been problematic rather than justified. "I'm glad you're getting help," I said carefully. "Mom, I know I don't have the right to ask this, and I know you probably won't say yes, but would you ever consider having coffee with me? Just to talk? I'm not asking for forgiveness or for things to go back to how they were. I miss you. I miss having a mother." The request hung in the air between us, complicated by a year of healing and growth that had happened entirely without her presence or input. I thought about the woman I'd been when she'd manipulated me into giving up my home. Desperate for her approval, willing to accept any scraps of attention she offered, so afraid of losing her love that I'd accepted behavior that wasn't love at all. That woman would have said yes immediately, grateful for any opportunity to rebuild a relationship regardless of what changes Jennifer had or hadn't made. That woman would have seen this phone call as validation that all the suffering had been worth it because her daughter had finally come back. But I wasn't that woman anymore. "Jennifer," I said gently, "I appreciate that you're working on yourself, and I hope therapy helps you build healthier relationships in the future. But I'm not interested in coffee or rebuilding our relationship. I've built a good life without you, and I want to keep it that way." The silence that followed was long and heavy. When Jennifer finally spoke, her voice was thick with tears. "I understand," she whispered. "I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to know." After we hung up, I sat on my screened porch with my evening tea, watching the sunset and thinking about forgiveness. I'd forgiven Jennifer months ago, not for her sake, but for mine. Carrying anger and resentment was like drinking poison and expecting someone else to get sick. I'd released those toxic emotions because they were harming me, not her. But forgiveness didn't require reconciliation. I could forgive someone for the harm they'd done while still protecting myself from future harm. I could wish them well while choosing not to re-enter relationships that had proven damaging to my well-being. My life now was built on foundations of mutual respect, genuine care, and healthy boundaries. People who wanted to be part of my life had to contribute to it rather than just taking from it. They had to value my presence rather than just my resources. They had to treat me like a person worthy of consideration rather than a problem to be managed. Jennifer hadn't demonstrated any of those qualities during our years together, and one therapy revelation didn't erase decades of manipulation and abuse. Maybe she would change. Maybe she would become the kind of person capable of healthy relationships. But that transformation would have to happen without me. I had spent too many years trying to love people into treating me better. I'd finally learned that I couldn't change other people. I could only change how I responded to them and what I was willing to accept. As the last light faded from the sky, I went inside my own house, locked my own door, and prepared for another day of the life I'd built entirely according to my own values and preferences. Tomorrow I would cook breakfast for a book club celebrating their 5th anniversary. Tomorrow I would work in my garden, tend my herbs, and maybe call Emma to see if she wanted to help me try a new cookie recipe. Tomorrow I would continue living the life I'd chosen, rather than the life others had chosen for me. At 75 years old, I had finally learned the most important lesson of all. You teach people how to treat you. And if you don't like how they're treating you, the most powerful thing you can do is change what you're willing to accept. I had accepted being discarded, manipulated, and stolen from for the last time. Now I accepted only love, respect, and genuine care from the people lucky enough to be part of my chosen family. And that made all the difference. If you're listening to this and feeling discarded, pushed aside, or forgotten by people who should love you, hear me clearly. Your story isn't over. Sometimes the most painful losses lead to the most beautiful discoveries about your own strength and worth. Have you ever experienced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to choose between keeping toxic relationships and protecting your own peace? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if this message resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones that help other people realize they're not alone in their struggles, and that healing is always possible, no matter how late in life it begins.